Hello, and welcome to our podcast series, Conversations with KidsPeace. I'm Bob Martin. Coming out of the holidays, there are probably a lot of families who are welcoming a new member to their household. No, I'm not talking about a puppy. I'm talking about a smartphone, maybe for one of their kids. Smartphones are amazing tools and amazing expressions of technology, but there are some pitfalls. And recently, KidsPeace's Jason Holler sat down with us to talk about what might be some pitfalls ahead of smartphone use, how to recognize them, and some tips on how to counterbalance them. Here's our conversation. Jason Holler, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Glad to see you.
So to start off with, what I'd like to do is to get your thoughts on the difference between what would be acceptable behavior when it comes to the use of a smartphone and behaviors that might be of concern to a parent or a guardian.
Sure. So acceptable behaviors, in my view, are behaviors in which, to what extent is the phone dictating your reactions, your attention? Is it interrupting relationships? One of the things that I notice in people today is it seems to be socially approved that we could be having this conversation, and if my phone dings, rings, buzzes, flashes, it's okay for me to completely disengage from talking with you without even excusing myself and just stare at the phone.
That because I would presume, like, forgive you for that.
We would hope so, and we would, I think, when cell phones first kind of came out, it was almost implied that this is something important I need to do. But before the time of smartphones, there wasn't that much necessity to stop what you're doing to attend to the phone.
Right.
It was okay to let things go to voicemail. But to your question about acceptable behavior, especially when it comes to adolescence specifically, I think acceptable behavior really depends on the child and how do they handle times where the phone is unavailable? To what extent is their social life dependent on that phone or technology? How are they sleeping? And is their sleeping impacted by using the phone, whether it's the light of the screen or just being engaged in multiple platforms on the phone in which they're lying in bed awake until 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then getting up at 6 for, school.
Right, right.
So I think that acceptable behavior is really going to vary depending on individuals, family dynamics. On the part of the individual, I always think that, you should always kind of check in with yourself and say, to what extent is this activity preventing me from being who I want to be or paying attention to what I want to pay attention to?
It really is about who's controlling who. It's like, are you controlling the phone, using the phone, or is the phone and everybody that can access you by it kind of controlling your life?
And that's a wonderful point. You're exactly right, because if we look at the cell phone, is the problem the smartphone itself? It's a lifeless thing. It's a piece of glass and plastic with some circuitry inside. But do you ever catch yourself just scrolling away, spending hours on your calculator? Or, any other, practical tool that the phone might have? No, of course not, because those tools serve a purpose and were not designed specifically to manipulate your reward system to keep you engaged. And that is, I think, what is the crux of what everybody's beginning to see about cell phone use. Maybe it's not exactly the phone itself, which was designed specifically to have a lot of user interaction and ability.
Right.
But how are the platforms on the phone being designed to capture your attention and maintain your attention?
And that leads me to my next question, because when you and I spoke about this, I thought this was a really fascinating point, that there's actually a physiological component to the compulsion to either, as you say, death scroll for hours on end, or if the phone beckons, you must pick it up. What's happening in somebody's brain when that?
So I do want to say that I'm not a neuroscientist. I am a person who has noticed changes in the way I approach things. And I've begun to look at myself and say, well, why is this happening? Why have I noticed that my attention span has shortened a little bit? I love movies. I would watch movies, sometimes the same movies over and over again with no problem. However, I've noticed in past few years that I'm having difficulty just wanting to stay engaged. I'm finding myself checking out of that sustained attention and doing something else, or maybe I'm more interested in short form entertainment. So when I stopped to look at that and I began reading some of the research out there, which is still kind of coming out because now we're getting to a length of time in which we can look at some of the research.
Right.
I began to read articles about the neurochemistry, the neuropsychology, psychiatry of how these apps are designed. And they're designed to make your reward system react through tones, sounds, time of day. One of the interesting things, a book that I'll share with your listeners, they bring up that the Facebook likes, for instance. Mm-hmm. If I post a photo on Facebook, and you have a number of people that click like, well, now you've created a kind of a high score. Instead of, now I have validation that 50 people gave me likes because they enjoyed this. So now I have that dopaminergic reaction. I feel great. 50 people like this. Now I'm going to do it again because, it's designed to give me that ping of dopamine, which feels good. And we want to feel good as humans, right? Right.
Absolutely. And again, that every part of that, the ability to feel like you're putting something out to the world, the reinforcement you get, you put something out and you might check sort of, again, compulsively check how many likes, how many shares, how many these things have you got, and what kind of comments you have. And then it is a little bit that once you realize sort of the very advanced technology that's behind doing that, it's almost like you now are clued in, so to speak.
And even the behavioral modification. I think one thing that I think many people should do in their life is understand, how are you persuaded? And, I think it's good to leave yourself open to being persuaded for another point of view, right? Mm-hmm. Like I have my own opinions on things in the world, but I would benefit if I allow myself to be persuaded by your point of view and kind of see which is a better argument. But there's a difference between persuasion and manipulation. Persuasion is a two-way street. Mm-hmm. You are listening to what I'm saying, you're considering what I'm saying, and we're having a dialogue. Manipulation is tactics designed to make you react a certain way. And there are specific psychological tactics that can be used and are used in order to influence your decision making. One of the best examples I like to point out that not a lot of people really think about is when you're in the cereal aisle of, a supermarket, and, I think, why are the more colorful cartoon characters on the lowest shelf? Well, that's, because kids are there.
Right. Exactly.
When you think about like environmental persuasion, when something is in a certain area that catches your attention, is that persuasion or is it manipulation because they're breaking some sort of communication expectation? Social media companies, and I'm not the first to say this or point this out, they are intentionally attempting to modify your behavior. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, well, why is this free? Like, why is Instagram free? Why is Facebook free? Well, it's because we are the product. Our time is the product, right?
That's what the advertisers are paying for, that kind of access.
Yeah.
And it's the same principle that is, governed persuasion or advertising since the beginning of time. It's just that now this technology makes it so much more powerful
and hugely invasive.
Right, because you can really get down to the person, it's almost like I can find that individual who's going to buy my cereal, as opposed to I put it out there and hope that that individual sees the ad on TV or on a billboard or something.
Right. You're casting a much wider net. And it's interesting when we look at, like, I think Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, they definitely are in the crosshairs of, maybe taking approaches to gaining people's attention and persuading. But what about other organizations that, offer you a free app and then there's a notification system? Like, why does Wawa have the right to send me a notification first thing in the morning to tell me that their sausage, egg, and cheeses are, on sale?
Right.
We've kind of in allowing this technology into our lives in such an intimate way, we've created real direct pathways for direct marketing. Right.
And I think one of the things you also mentioned was that I thought was really interesting that ties into that is the concept that we're losing places where we can gather. Like, we're social creatures, we want to gather, and it seems to me that ultimately we're starting to get that organized around things like I am a Wawa person. I have the Wawa app, and then at some point, or I follow, the sports team, or I'm involved with this particular situation. That it's another way of kind of reinforcing that you need to be part of the loop here and to get involved.
They call that FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Right.
Just backing up and looking culturally, where are our town squares anymore?
Right.
Like, where do we congregate? Those places are becoming more and more distant in many ways. So, I think that the phone or the smartphone really can be a good tool for bringing people together and bringing those who are isolated into some sort of community. I think that's one of the very positive aspects of the technology. But in what ways might it also divide us too? Mm-hmm. Especially when we get into talking about algorithms. Now, I'm not a computer scientist, but I would encourage your listeners, if you have Instagram, and you or a scrolling sort of platform like TikTok, have you ever gone in and selected things that you were not interested in seeing versus things you're interested in seeing? Now, I've noticed something interesting when I'm on Instagram. It doesn't happen right away because I delete the app from time to time as one of the ways to try and control it, because it's designed to be interesting, and I could catch myself 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And, but then I always feel like I don't feel great afterwards, and I'm less motivated throughout the day.
Right.
But when I've deleted it and gone back, when I go through the scrolling feature, I'm a 42-year-old man. I have no interest in seeing kids dancing,
right? Right.
And yet they feed this content to me, especially girls dancing. I don't necessarily want to see that. So I might say, not interested. Scroll a little bit more. Oh, here's someone else dancing again. Not interested. It'll take about 10 times before that's out of my feed.
Right.
What I've noticed is interesting is it doesn't take long before it starts peppering back in.
Interesting.
It's really kind of, I was just doing it yesterday, actually, because the feed again, because, I kind of go back and forth with, my relationship to my smartphone and the apps I use. But here again, not interested. And now some of the posts, I can't even select if I'm not interested. Mm-hmm. I can't tell the algorithm, I don't want to see this, but they think 42-year-old man, let's keep him engaged. What can we do to do that? Let's give him sexual content, or let's give political content. Let's give content that gets him emotionally involved. And then maybe he'll comment and come back to argue with someone.
Right.
If you pay attention to yourself while you're using these programs, I think you'll notice.
That leads me to a question I have: and taking it back to parents, they might have a child that have a smartphone for the first time. Do you think it's wise or even necessary that the parent look at their own use of the smartphone as they're evaluating what it would be good or what would not be good in terms of the child.
Absolutely. Children mimic parents. And even just saying from a view of just being a person, I think we should always look at our behaviors. Are we striving to be a better person? And in what ways are these behaviors positively or negatively impacting me? And when it comes to smartphone addiction, I try not to exaggerate as a person. I really try to be down to earth in the things that I share. I drive a lot for my role here at KidsPeace. In the marketing world where we're out on the road, I can say without exaggerating that the majority of people I see who are causing traffic problems are literally looking down at their phone. Like I've seen it so much that it has actually begun to scare me, because if I see someone in a merge zone, literally with their head down, that's
right.
Probably, like, I can get it if you're like on a straightaway, you have, miles of highway ahead of you, and maybe you want to adjust a song or something. Right. I have to look at my phone sometimes in the car. So if I have my wheel here, my phone is situated right next to the wheel, so that I'm not really pulling.
So your attention is not coming off of the windshield or coming out what's wrong with this.
And if it is, it's very, very minimal. But I've seen people literally looking down, driving 60 miles an hour, and I'm not exaggerating at all. So when it comes to raising children, I'm not a parent. I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but with the kids I've worked with, they always look at your behavior to determine what they can get away with or do.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the example of the parent is always the most powerful motivator. Well, let's talk about what are some tips that you might have in terms of dealing with what appears to be an over-reliance on the use of a cell phone? What can you do, especially when you're talking about your kids?
Well, what I've done is I've kind of I've battled a lot with, should I just get a dumb phone? And they are still out there. I just saw a flip phone the other day that has some capacity to meet your needs, but may not have the social networking aspect. You can start by, one thing that, if I can show you.
Sure.
Oh, I don't have my phone with me. When I lift up my phone, I have no notifications, and it's wonderful. I don't want this thing to interrupt me. I was in a meeting just before coming to see you, and someone's phone was on the table, and I noticed that in the course of 1 hour, they had probably 4 notifications. I'm not trying to look at their phone, but it's sitting on the table next to me, and I see it light up, and it was like a LinkedIn message. There was a calendar message. I think that, if you begin to find ways to, prevent yourself from being interrupted, it's an active process, and it's an uphill battle. Do you put your phone down at certain points of the night? Do you delete apps that keep your attention? Do you utilize your screen time and prevent the amount of time you spend on your phone?
Right.
I've even I brought 2 items to show. These are not, I'm not paid for this, but these are 2 items that have helped me. One is a book called How to Break Up with Your Smartphone, or How to Break Up with Your Phone by Catherine Price. She was a science reporter and put together a really great amount of information on, we have to know the knowledge. If you don't know what's going on with your phone, you may not understand how to stop using it. So I think we would have to learn, how is this being utilized, and what do I need to do to get away from it? I also bought this thing. It's called the Brick. As far as I know right now, it's only being used for iPhones, although I do think they're creating an Android. I love this thing. So the way it works, it has a magnetized back, and you can put it on your refrigerator. You download an app to your phone, and on that app, you select what items you want locked. Okay, and then you choose them, and when you're ready, you tap your phone against the brick, and you cannot access those apps. So one of the things I use YouTube a lot when I'm driving, just listening, but sometimes, might get a big data bill. So I might lock YouTube, leave this at home on the refrigerator, leave in the morning. I can't unlock it until I get home. Now, of course, if you know what you're doing, you probably could unlock it, but just having this as the thing that helps me help myself has been very helpful.
It seems to me that one of the aspects to things like the books, things like that particular capability is just being aware of how much time you're using the phone, using its capabilities, and what that science is behind, where you kind of the curtain gets pulled back and you can see how people might be trying to get you to death scroll, trying to get you to
stay engaged.
When you're, I had a family member many years ago addicted to cigarettes, and I remember seeing her, if the phone, which was a landline a million years ago, she would go to it, and automatically one hand would go for the phone and one hand would go for the pack of cigarettes and the lighter.
Yeah.
And she wasn't thinking about it. She wasn't like looking around. She knew where it was, and by muscle memory. Once you and she did quit and live a long life. But once you become aware of how that is working inside your own head, you become more a smarter user. And
I completely agree. And, there's the term that we hear more and more and more and more is mindfulness, right? And I'm not going to approach mindfulness from the perspective that you should start meditating, although there's a lot of great documented benefits of the power of meditating. Can really change your brain. It can stop ruminating. Meditation and mindfulness are wonderful. I think you can employ mindfulness without needing to go down like a meditative path. And just check in with yourself. Begin to develop situational awareness. If it is a Saturday morning and you have no responsibilities for the time being and you think, I'll just stop and look at my phone for a little bit, I would ask you to check in, maybe set a timer, but how do you feel while you're doing this? What is it that you're looking at? Are you even attending to a 20-second reel? Or are you just skipping through for the sake of skipping through? One of the things I noticed about myself, I called it the stimulation trail, in which I'll start with an app where I'm scrolling. And when I begin to get bored of that, which does happen after about 15, 20 minutes, I'll go out of that app and I'll go to another app. And then I'll scroll on that for a little bit. When that gets boring, I'll go to something else. And I've noticed I'll even go in to check my bank account when I don't even need to.
Right.
And
right.
And I've noticed, like, I just checked my bank account yesterday. It's fine. I don't need to. I'm doing this for stimulation.
Right.
I'll check my email. I don't need to check my email at this time. Saturday morning, I have nothing. It's that stimulation trail. I'm looking for these small hits of dopamine. And maybe you ask yourself, how is your day after that? I've noticed within myself, if I start a morning on the phone, I am more inclined that day to look for stimulating activities. It's less likely that I'll read. It's less likely that I will do something that is positive for me. I'll look at, maybe I have the luxury of playing video games. Maybe I'll play a video game then. I find it's harder to attend to less stimulating things when I start the day in such a high stimulating activity.
So just being aware of
cultivate awareness
of what you're doing can help a great deal.
I think so.
I know. In our previous conversations, we've had you're an outdoorsman. You love outdoors. You've worked as a recreational technician here at KidsPeace in your career. I'm just wondering if you think is trying to get kids outside more, can that be a counterbalance to the impact of smartphone use? Won't replace it, but just something to
absolutely. And I think that there are some great, technology that. There's some great programs with the smartphone that could be complementary to getting outdoors. You put me in the woods, I'm happy. I will literally look at an ant and watch it go for a little bit because I just think that's kind of fascinating. Or, I'll hike an area that I'm unfamiliar with because I have that need to just explore a new place. Hopefully there's a waterfall there because I really enjoy the waterfalls. But absolutely, if you can work with your child to encourage them to appreciate time outdoors, I think that when you're outdoors, every sense is being utilized to some extent. So it might be, a nice way to help them begin to learn that, hey, you can enjoy your time without a phone. But also you can use some of the apps on the phone to enjoy your time outside. I love this one app called Star Walk, because I hike at night. It's really actually a great time to hike because there's no one around. And when you see the stars and you see like, what is this bright one? Is that a planet? What is it? And the Star Walk app will do kind of a augmented reality where you can look through your phone and it'll line up a constellation. And now you know what planet that is. Any kid, any adolescent, any child I've shown that to, love it. And suddenly now they have an interest in the stars, planets, and things like that. There are some really great identification apps. Again, with my outdoorsiness, I like to be able to identify different plants, different trees. Sometimes I play a game with myself where I ask, like, okay, in this situation right now, if I needed to, could I survive in the woods? And, I'll ask myself, okay, well, what would I eat if I needed to? Like, and some people might think that that's a little silly, but it could change in a second. You could go out for a hike, a storm come through, your phone get knocked out, your ability to get help could be, you might have to be in the woods for a couple hours if you're that kind of in that situation. Do you know what would help you there? And maybe a phone would help you see, oh, this is Southern Catalpa. This is what's the ones that look like hot dogs, like cattails, right?
Cattails, right.
I can eat this root. I'm not saying you should go out and eat things unless
let's make sure people understand.
Definitely
just because the cell phone says people can eat it doesn't mean you should. Yeah.
But maybe you get interested in like mushrooms and mycology. That is a wonderfully fascinating and huge realm. Maybe you could begin documenting, what are the mushrooms in my yard? What does this mean? If you see a ring of mushrooms on the ground, that means there's a root system underground in which the mycelium or the mushrooms are eating. Well, this kind of mushroom might only eat like birch, so that's kind of it. I think that's kind of interesting, but I've also found kids really enjoy that.
Right.
Bird call apps, trail apps, so that maybe you do feel more empowered to take your kids hiking in a place where you're unfamiliar. There's Gaia GPS and All Trails. These aren't endorsements, but I've used them personally, where you can go and explore a place you've heard about, but never knew how to get there. You didn't have a guide to take you there. So I think, you made a great point in our conversation the other day that maybe it's not necessarily the phone itself, it's your relationship to the phone. Right. How are you using it? The world has gotten to a point where it's really hard to disconnect from the smartphone. I have looked at so many ways. How can if I have difficulty controlling my behavior with this device, what can I do to kind of minimize that, and I start looking at, well, what do I really need it for? Well, I do need GPS. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, maybe I could buy a TomTom or a dedicated GPS system to keep in my car. I do need to check my banking, even though I might do it out of stimulation. Sometimes you need to move funds around.
Right.
It's great to have that capability right away. Awesome, positive benefit. But, I could do that on a laptop as well. Do I always need to be able to see my monies right away? However, we use Salesforce. Sometimes I need to authenticate that I'm trying to get into it. So it's kind of hard to let go of a smartphone if I have an authentication need, or, maybe I need to be on my email a little bit more often. So you really need to look at, to what extent do I need? To what extent have I created the need? I love music. I have so much music. It's ridiculous. I buy way too much music. I'll hear a song and I'm like, oh, cool. Get that song, even though I'm out in the middle of the woods. And I have it on my phone, which is great, but maybe I should get an MP3 player and put my music on there. It's amazing how much the smartphone has consolidated so many things and really become ubiquitous.
Right. But it sounds like, not to be too flippant about it, but it sounds like when you hear the term smartphone, it's calling upon you to be smart when you use it too. Yeah. It's not just the device that's smart. You need to be that way as well. Yeah.
We need to always, look at, are our activities helping us become the kind of person we want to be?
Right.
And I think over the past few years, everybody seems to be, we're all kind of in the same place of like, what's going on in the world, right? Like, and the world is really big though. And you're your perspective is really, your mind is clay, and it's being shaped by a lot of outside forces, and to what extent are you okay with that? Honestly, when I have deleted Instagram, Facebook, and really not used the phone, the world is wonderful. It's just as it was. It really is.
Right.
People are still outgoing. There are some communication issues I've noticed. Some people have difficulties with sustained eye contact, or maybe, there's a little bit more social anxiety, and I can appreciate that and accept that. But when you engage in too much time in anything, it can really harm you. Right. The world is still very wonderful. It's really awesome out there. Get off your phone. Get off your phone, because you'll see that, well, it's really great.
You might have, given a hint to my final question, which is, of course, when we have guests on, we ask them for a life hack to share with the audience. Favorite saying, piece of advice, whatever it is. So what's your life hack for us today?
Well, when you asked me this question, the other day, there's so many that I think about. But one that has always kind of come back to me is Robert Frost's poem, The Road Less Traveled. I really appreciate the final part of the poem in which, he says he, took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference, right? You're kind of, I think you're consistently at a crossroads in life almost every day. And there's the way that everyone is taken, which is, it's worn down. You know what to expect. You've seen others do it. You have a good mindset of like what to expect. There's nothing wrong with taking that path, but some of the best things in my life were because I went down the path that looked like a little deer trail. I didn't know where it was going. It kind of looked like an ephemeral trail. I'm like, is this a trail? When I started walking down it, I've met some of the most wonderful people. I've learned some of the best things. Try to take the road less traveled more often. I think you'll find that there's a lot of wonderful adventures to have.
Very good. Excellent.
That's what I got for you.
Jason Heller, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you inviting me. I hope this is helpful.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us as well. We hope that you'll join us again for more conversations with KidsPeace. Until then, take care.